MacFarlane has been hailed by the Wall Street Journal as the great nature writer of his generation, and his beautiful and wise books, Mountains of the Mind, The Wild Places, The Old Ways, and Landmarks, don't just show us marvelous landscapes, they explore the traditions, beliefs, and languages these places have fostered. His new book delves even further, exploring the deep time of caves, glaciers, and burial chambers, as well as reflecting on the meaning of our most ancient myths and primal dreams. In a wide-ranging look at the wonderlands beneath our feet, from geological formations of limestone to the many formations in the Paris catacombs, MacFarlane takes us on a truly unique and unforgettable adventure. Here to talk more about it, please help me welcome Robert MacFarlane.
Thank you, Liz. Can everybody hear me? Yes, no. At the back? I am a teacher, so I am taught to project. So just, give me a wave of the hat if you can't hear me properly. So thank you for that introduction. Such a generous introduction. The only problem with it, so generous that only disappointment can follow. Okay, there we go. Now, thank you for that hat raise back there. All right, this is my American debut. I won't call it premiere. That would be far too... Oh, look at that. What a warm welcome. Thank you so much. I have never spoken in public in America before, apart from one university lecture. So thank you for being here. I walked into this bookstore and was struck by the number of people here an hour ago. Not for me, but just for books and for culture. It felt like a buzzing place, and that was exciting to me. I can see some old friends. I think there are some digital friends here, and there are many new faces, and I'm really glad to see you all. I nearly didn't make it. I dressed for a 29 degrees centigrade day in Washington, D.C., not reckoning with the frostbite-inducing air conditioning on the train. Yours, I haven't worked out how to manage this country of yours that blows so hot and cold. Books have their origin myths, and those myths almost always retreat in the measure that you advance towards them. And I could start this book several billion years ago at the beginning of the universe, but that truly would be grandiloquent. I could start it when I was growing up as a child in Nottingham, where my father was a chest physician who looked into the underlands of people's bodies. He treated miners who were suffering from industrial diseases, black lung, silicosis, because we lived in mining country, coal country, colliery country in Nottinghamshire, north of that county. And those headworks, those spoil heaps, that was the landscape architecture of my childhood. And my father's task, in many respects, was to look into the interiors of the people who had delved into the interiors of that landscape. I also had a sense of walking above hollow land. I had a sense of stories of place that fell away beneath me that I really never saw into. I also grew up in a city of caves. Nottingham, if any of you have been there, will know that it's primarily famous for Robin Hood, that socialist/capitalist hero of popular culture, depending on your interpretation. But it's also famous as a city of caves. It's a sandstone city. And you could enter a pub, and the pub would literally recede into the bedrock. Or you could enter a tunnel in the castle and turn up at street level, 50 feet below where you went in. So my imagination as a child was wormholed by that rough and strange city that I grew up in. But that's not where this book begins. Where this book really begins is in 2010. And I think everybody here was around in 2010. Bard? No. All right, this one's not for you, sweetheart, I'm afraid. I love babies. I'm going to get very distracted soon, sorry. Thank you very much for bringing the youngest member of this audience. In 2010, three things happened. Many things happened. Three things happened that struck me and may strike you in memory. One was that the Deepwater Horizon blowout occurred in April of that year. Also in April of that year, a volcano erupted, an Icelandic volcano called Eyjafjallajökull. Anyone from Iceland here? Okay, that pronunciation was perfect. The Eyjafjallajökull volcano erupted, and as you may remember, it spewed ash as deep water spewed oil, and they both brought our systems, our above-ground systems, to a fierce halt. The volcano grounded flights across much of Northern Europe and American airspace. And in the summer of that same year, a third Underland story unfolded, and that was the story of the Chilean 33. The miners who were trapped when a blowout of a different kind occurred deep under the Atacama Desert in the Sao Paulo gold and copper mine. And for me, the conjunction of those three stories, all of which really took until the autumn to solve themselves insofar as they did within the public imagination as accidents and incidents that had occurred. Of course, they had much longer legacies for many of the people and the landscapes involved. They struck me then as very powerful eruptions of the underland into the upper world. We have historically treated and mythically treated the underland as a place where we store things that are precious to us, that we want to keep safe from time's accelerations and mutations as they function on the surface, things we wish to be rid of forever, nuclear waste being a very good example of that because they are too toxic for the upper world. And also a realm where we have gone to retrieve things of value, whether that be the sheer resource-based matter of metals and of potash and of minerals, or the beloved dead who feature so much in the catabases, the descents of classical myth. But what the Underland has rarely done is surface. And when it does surface, it upsets something in a psychic, profound way. This is what Freud calls the return of the repressed. He figures the undermined, the subconscious, as the place where we put all the stuff we can't handle. I don't want to give a Freudian reading of a psychogeology, but I will only mention that in the sense that this idea of traumatic resurfacings turns up again and again in forms of thought. And we are now, I think, living through a phase of traumatic surfacing. We are living through a period we are increasingly coming to call the Anthropocene. And this is a time when the ways we have become geological agents are forces as a species amplified by our numbers and by our technologies to the extent that we are reshaping time. And one of the very charismatic ways in which we are doing that is that deep time, the time of the underworld, the ancient time of the earth measured in millions and billions of years and eons and epochs and eras, not minutes and hours, is being disrupted. And that which was buried is coming to the surface. I will give you some examples of that. It's mostly happening in the cold places. Permafrost is no longer perma. It is temporary frost. It is melting, and as it melts, that which was held within it, whether that be methane, or whether that be the 50,000-year-old wolf pup that was found by miners in the Yukon, birthed again from the permafrost, perfectly preserved, right down to the curl of its lip and the hair on its body from 50 millennia ago. These things are surfacing. Reindeer dead of anthrax a century ago, buried in shallow graves on the Yamal Peninsula in Siberia, have been pushed up to the surface again. And as they have risen, so their dormant spores have been released. And so an anthrax epidemic has broken out in 2016 in Siberia, which infected humans, killed a child, and brought down these strange, surreal sights of Russian epidemiologists in hazmat suits swarming all over remote Siberia. Our glaciers are retreating, the cryosphere is melting, and as it melts, the things that were buried within it, bodies, areas of landscape that have not seen light for tens of thousands of years, the dead of the Kashmir conflicts or the White War in the Dolomite regions of Europe are emerging, strange ghosts carrying warnings of the disruptions that we are carrying out. So I began to write this book thinking that it would be a profoundly inhuman book. It would be preoccupied above all with the deep time lives of ice and rock and the ancient memories of a planet, it became, to my surprise, the most urgent book I'd ever written, the one that was overtaken by the time of its writing. That is partly because it took a really long time to write. My editors soon became tired of the excuse that a deep time book could not be rushed. And the sound of fingers tapping on a desk became audible even across the Atlantic. But I felt this was a book that did need to take the time that needed to be taken. And I finished it last June, a year ago this month. And some of you will remember, actually I think all of you will remember what happened that month when I remind you, which is that a football team of young Thai boys, led by, leading their coach, went in under the mountain, and they were trapped there by rising rain, and no one thought they would escape. And they did escape, despite the best efforts of the arrogant man-god Elon Musk, who turned up to attempt to present himself as the Deus Ex Machina who could extract them from their mythic fix. But of course they were brought out actually by the good work of many hands, much care, not by a single person dramatizing himself as hero, but by specialism shared and cooperation undertaken. And they all surfaced, as did all of the 33. This isn't always the Chilean 33. This isn't always the way. But I was struck once that safety had been reached by those boys, by how modern and contemporary a story that was, but also how ancient it was. The oldest written story we have is the Epic of Gilgamesh, 2100 BC circa in Sumeria. One of the variants to the Epic of Gilgamesh tells of Enkidu, the servant of Gilgamesh. And Gilgamesh, in the way of masters, says to Enkidu in the way of servants, "Hey, head down into the underworld for me, will you? And find something that is precious to me." Enki does this, undertakes a hazardous journey, doesn't find the precious thing, is imprisoned, eventually is released back up to the upper world. And there he sits with Gilgamesh under the sun, and they talk together. And Enki says, I saw your unborn sons, your unborn children down there. And you realize that the precious thing that he has brought back is not the object of value, but this encounter with the dead, the children that Gilgamesh has never seen because they died before they could see the light. And the tenderness to me of that story told and heard across thousands of years, a message still recognizable to us across that great expanse of time, I found deeply moving and also reprised in the hugs that those mothers and those fathers gave to their children when they were born again out of the mountain. So these are the oldest stories and the newest stories, and I tell many of them here. I begin really at the birth of the universe because there are many great gaps in our knowledge, but one of the greatest is the mystery of dark matter. And dark matter is the missing 27% or so of the universe's mass, a great hole, a great void in our understanding of the way the universe is composed. And dark matter is studied underground. Physicists trying to ascertain the birth of the universe have to go half a mile below ground because that is the quietest place in the universe. It's where baryonic matter, the stuff we're made of as we understand it, the stuff we're sitting on today, is at its quietest because it's shielded by rock. And down there in what is fabulously called, in a phrase straight from Doctor Who, a time projection chamber. They don't quite have a sonic screwdriver, but they really might as well. Physicists try to hear dark matter in motion. The book begins there and it ends many chapters later, many journeys later, many stories later, and many people later, far into the future Anthropocene, where we, in Finland, Onkalo, which is the hiding place, which is the first and only successful construction of a deep geological repository for the final storage of high-level nuclear waste, which is to say a big hole in the ground to put the really messy stuff in, has been constructed and is soon to be filled with uranium. And that is a structure which has been designed and created and intended to last, to keep safe that waste for up to 100,000 years into the future. The pyramids around under 5,000 years old. The oldest church really in Britain, not even 2,000 years old. We have never attempted to create a structure that will be so durable through deep time. And I went to that place expecting a sort of melodramatic Gotterdammerung. I thought this would be the end of the world and the end of my book. Instead, I found, on the whole, good people trying to do a hard job under difficult circumstances. And I was moved above all by the care that was being extended to humans and indeed to species and post-humans as yet unborn. And if there is an animating question at the heart of Underland, it is that posed by Jonas Salk, the immunologist, who asks, are we being good ancestors? And when you first meet that question, are we being good ancestors, it stops you and it puzzles you. And then you do the time flip that it requires. Oh, I see. We are the ancestors of those to come. I need to be thinking forwards here. And then it searches you as a question, and it keeps searching you, or it keeps searching me. And at Onkalo, and indeed throughout the book, I become interested in this question of ancestry, of legacy. We are living in the Anthropocene, this notion that we are leaving a mark in our actions that is legible and will be legible in the strata record for millions of years to come. And among the shocks that that notion administers to us is that of legacy. How will we be legible? What are we leaving behind? Well, some of the answers to that might be radionuclide spikes, golden spikes through nitrogen over-fertilization, sixth grade extinction, the disappearance of biodiversity and their replacement with the immense proliferation of biomass in the form of livestock animals. What will remain of us is love, Larkin sort of says. But no, probably what will remain of us is swine bones and plastic and lead-207, which is at the end of the uranium-235 decay chain. Are these the ways we wish to be read? I don't think so. But I do think that we wish to ask ourselves, we need to ask ourselves, are we being good ancestors? I will just read a couple of passages from the book, and then we can open to conversation and stories of your own. And I thought I'd read one scary passage and one, I won't say funny passage because you might not find it funny at all, but let's say less than dark passage. So I'm going to go towards the end of the book. I'm a cryophile, which means I love ice. And I've written about it in every book. But this book is the iciest of the books I've written. And much of the last third of it takes place in the north of Europe, Finland, Norway, Arctic Norway, and Greenland. And that's partly because I'm north-minded and drawn to such places, but it's also because the fate of ice is the fate of us. Ice is so vast, so astonishingly sublime in the old sense, and yet it is also so vulnerable and so fragile. The eternal snows of the north are, like the permafrost, suddenly ill-named. Ice is on the move, and it is changing state with consequences that will be working themselves out for millennia to come. So I was in eastern Greenland for the best part of the end of summer and through into autumn, and it was the hottest year, 2016. At that point, temperatures in Nuuk, the capital of Greenland, reached 22 degrees C. The melt on the ice cap started a month earlier than usual. The bergs were sweating in the channel. The polar bears were swimming because they had no ice to haul out on and no seals to hunt. And the moulins, the vertical meltwater shafts, which get drilled down into the glaciers, were roaring. But when we were up there, far from anywhere, something extraordinary happened. So we're near a glacier called the Knut Rasmussen, which is eastern Greenland, is about 2,500 kilometers long. It has about 2,500 to 4,000 inhabitants, depending on how you count them. It happens that afternoon when we're all together, there are 6 of us, standing near the tents and talking inconsequentially, enjoying the lethargy of the rest day. A shot like snap begins it, whip cracking across the fjord and the mountain walls. A hunter, I say? But it isn't a hunter, it's the glacier, and the sound of the crack marks the fall of a bus-sized block of ice from high on the carving face. We do not see it fall, but we see it swill back up and bob. Without that outrider of the main event, we might have missed what followed, an event that, as Helen puts it later, rarely occurs under witness. There, shouts Bill, but we're all already looking there where the first block fell, for it seems that a white freight train is driving fast out of the carving face of the glacier, thundering laterally through space before toppling down towards the water, and then the white train is suddenly somehow pulling white wagons behind it from within the glacier, like an impossible magician's trick, and then the white wagons are followed by a cathedral, a blue cathedral of ice complete with towers and buttresses, all of them joined together into a single, unnatural, sideways collapsing edifice, and then a whole city of white and blue follows the cathedral as we shout and step backwards involuntarily at the force of the event, even though it's occurring a mile away from us, and we call out to each other in the silence before the roar reaches us, even though we are only a few yards from each other. And then all of the hundreds of thousands of tons of that ice city collapse into the water of the fjord, creating an impact wave 40 or 50 feet high, and then something truly terrible happens, which is that out of the water where the city has fallen, there upsurges rising, or so it seems from where we are standing, right to the summit of the carving face itself, a black, shining pyramid, sharp at its prow, thrusting and glistening, made of a substance that has to be ice, but looks like no ice we have seen before, something that resembles what I imagine meteorite metal to be, something that has come from so deep down in time that it's lost all colour. And we are dancing and swearing and shouting, appalled and thrilled to have seen this repulsive, exquisite thing rise up that should never have surfaced. This star-drop berg surge that's taken 3 minutes and 100,000 years to conclude. 20 minutes later and the fjord is calm again. The tide swills gently in rock pools. Sedge grass flicks in the wind, and the obscenity might never have occurred. The berg has settled in the water as a sloping blue table, hundreds of square feet in area. Gulls land on this new territory in their dozens, shake out their wings, tuck one leg up into their breast feathers for warmth, hunker down. The next day at the tide line, I find a small iceberg, rounded and dark blue, stranded in a rock pool. I take it to be a relic of the dark star. I'm just able to lift it, and I carry it in both arms, cradling it, calling to the others. It numbs my hands and chest. It feels far heavier than it should. I stumble uphill towards the camp and place it on top of a boulder by the tents. The sun shines through it. Air bubbles inside it show as silver. That night an Arctic fox comes to our camp, a playful blue shadow. The little berg takes 2 days to melt. It leaves a stain on the dark rock that won't vanish. I now want to turn to a person because we've lived with matter there for a few minutes. That dark berg was ice so old that it had been compressed to the point of losing almost all colour, and it had actually come up from under the waterline. Instead of carving from the carving face above the water, it had risen up from so far down. It was so old. Of course, carving is a natural glacial action. That is how glaciers flow. But also we know that many of them are accelerating their flow rates. And the front where glaciers meet seawater is the front where sea level rise is really being determined. I'll just end my portion by turning to a person. And the person is a wonderful man called Bjørnar Nicolaisen, who I've promised to bring back a piece of granite from the Sierra Nevada for. He loves stones, and I took him a stone. I love giving people stones. If you ever become my friend, don't expect chocolate. You're going to get granite. It doesn't taste as good, but it lasts longer. And Bjørnar was, well, you'll meet him. Let me see if I can find it. I will say that he became very involved in the fight against drilling in the Arctic waters off the Lofoten Islands and off the Vesterålen Islands, which, as some of you will know, are Arctic latitude Norway and possess astonishing cold water reefs, extraordinary marine ecologies, but are, like all places, vulnerable to drilling and the testing that precedes it. Bjørnar is huge. When he grips you by the bicep, which is his sort of gesture of friendship, you feel he could just lift you up, right like that, like a cup. He has a big white beard, and he has eyes that are so white they look like they are seeing into the future. I can't do Norwegian accents. So unless there is anyone here who is willing to, so you're just going to have to imagine this in a Norwegian accent and a big booming voice. I have 4 pets, Bjørnar Nicolaisen tells me at 69 degrees north, 2 cats and 2 sea eagles. I feed them all together on the shore, there by the throne with the best fish in the world. He gives a huge laugh and points east through the window of his living room, snow-filled fields sloping away to a rocky beach that borders a fjord several miles in width. Far across the fjord, ranks of smooth-snowed peaks gleam in the late sunlight. They're shaped more wildly than any mountains I've ever seen before, witches' hats and shark fins and jabbing fingers, all polished white as porcelain. I cannot see a throne on the shore, though. Here, try these. He hands me a pair of binoculars. Black, leather-clad barrels weathered in places to brown, polished eyepieces, and a Nazi eagle engraved into the left-hand barrel back. Wehrmacht issue, says Bjørnar proudly. Beautiful lenses and officers. When my father was dying, he asked me what I wanted from his possessions. One thing only, I told him. The binoculars you took from the fucking Germans. I lift the binoculars and the shoreline leaps to my eyes, close enough to touch. Calibrated crosshairs float in my vision. I pan right along the beach. Nothing. I switch back left. And there, yes, there, a chair of some kind, but 6 or 7 feet tall, built from driftwood, lashed and nailed together. It looks like a chair you do not climb into, you mountaineer into. It looks like something the Ironborn of Westeros might have made. I take the eagles a cod or a saithe whenever I come back from a good day's fishing. I feed them by my chair there. Bjørnar, you are the only person I know who counts sea eagles among his pets. I am more of a cat person, Bjørnar replies. Than a dog person or than an eagle person? Than a people person. Bjørnar laughs, and I'll just read you a couple more paragraphs of Bjørnar. We spend a lot of time together. We fish, and I'm with his family for over a week, and in that region. And when we're out fishing, whenever I'm going to swear again, sorry, I will bleep it. But whenever we're fishing and Bjørnar catches a fish, he says, "Thank you for the fish, God." But back on land, it turns out that things are slightly different. And the other thing I should tell you about Bjørnar is that his favourite hat is a raccoon hat, but it really is a raccoon hat in a very sort of fundamental way. It is a raccoon that is coiled round with its tail still hanging back down, and it has 2 white eyes, actually black eyes, and they're positioned immediately above Bjørnar's really white eyes. So the effect is of looking at somebody with 4 eyes, 2 of which are obsidian black and 2 of which are a kind of blue-white visionary hue. So this is strange. Early that afternoon, we're now back in his home. We eat saithe with butter and potatoes while the cat with lizard eyes watches us from a corner. Ingrid ladles the fish from pot to plate, and Bjørnar thumps the table with both fists and says grace. Hell, thank you for the fish in the pot. That's a more polite version of grace than the one you quoted in the boat, I say. Bjørnar laughs, thumps the table again. One language for sea, another for land. We then go out driving, and he drives this big car with black windows. Bjørnar spots a seagull on the shore. The sidetrack takes us closer to it. We drive slowly past a row of wooden houses near the beach. I watch the eagle through binoculars. It's perched on a kelpie boulder, and its 4-foot wings hang around it like an oversized cloak. There's movement from one of the houses. A finger twitches back a curtain and a face looks anxiously out at us. Why does that man look at us like that? Bjørnar asks, puzzled. Bjørnar, I say, I've read enough Scandinavian crime fiction to know that we're behaving quite a lot like murderers. We're two men in a big black car and dark glasses, and one of them's wearing a dead raccoon on his head, and the other is scanning lonely houses through a pair of binoculars. That person should be forgiven for feeling worried. That booming laugh again. You are a good man, Rob. He drives on. The face at the window disappears. There are blue hues to the snow now. A wooden swing on a beach shifts in the wind, and sea eagles pluck a dark carcass far out on a frozen lake. All right, you've heard more than enough from me, so over to you all.
Hello.
Hello.
So, I've come to this bookstore many times, and I always hope for a great experience, but I must say that your prose and your reading was astonishing to me, and I feel quite fortunate that I was here for your first American reading, so thank you for that. So my question is back to your childhood and your town. So I guess my question is about reading that you might have done as a child, and I'm thinking of Jules Verne's and Journey to the Center of the Earth. I myself have a lot of claustrophobic fears about being deep. So could you talk a little bit about your childhood and your reading and your imagination that drew you to this?
Thank you. Thank you for the generous opening to that, and then a question which is about things being closed down, but does open them up. I am fascinated by claustrophobia. Early in the book, I quote from what would have been my equivalent of whatever your primal scene read was, which is a novel called The Weird Stone of Brisingamen by Alan Garner, who's one of that dynasty of extraordinary writers that emerged in British children's literature, which includes Susan Cooper, who wrote The Dark is Rising, who I am going to meet in 2 nights' time, and I am so stoked about that. And in The Weird Stone of Brisingamen, which takes place in Alderley Edge, which is a mined sandstone outcrop in Cheshire, there is one of the most claustrophobic scenes in all of literature, not just children's literature. And that you mention it to people in Britain of a certain age, and they will all shiver and shift. And I became fascinated by the power of claustrophobia to communicate itself vicariously through description, which is to say that when you read about claustrophobia, it has a power that is not the same as experiencing it firsthand, but remains moving. And by that I mean physically moving as well as heart moving. People shift their bodies. They start to look to the light. And that fascinated me because as a writer, you want to move people. You want to move them in lots of ways. But I suddenly thought there was this extraordinary resource that I wanted to write about claustrophobia in part, and that this had the power to move people. So I've been getting quite a lot. There's a passage in the book quite early on, which is probably the pinch point of claustrophobia in the book. And I've had quite a few people write to me and they've said, look, I really enjoyed the book up to that point, but there I just had to put it down. And I thought this is probably the only time as a writer when I'm thrilled to hear that a reader had to put a book down. So I also think that claustrophobia is a distinctive affect of the time we're living through. If I may expand it out to a metaphysic like that we are living through a time that is not the end times and mustn't be, because we can't think of it like that, but where we are experiencing a running out of time and space. So I put that to one side. But yes, I read a great deal. Most of it was mountains, actually. But I live near the Peak District, which is limestone, and there was a whole literature and a whole culture of caving, what you guys call spelunking, I think. And I remember walking there, and suddenly this head popped up like a gopher, but it was human. And I realized that this was what Arthur Conan Doyle, writing of that region, calls Hollow Land. So yes, it perforated me, that place. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
I actually had
Hi.
Sorry. I had a follow-up question, actually. You were talking about kind of your perspective as a writer, and to me, your prose reads like poetry, and just how you turn facts and people into poetry. And I just, as someone who struggles to even put something into a coherent first draft, I'd love to hear more about how you how you do that, like how you approach that. What is the process in which you just write? And I know that's sort of impossible question, but I'd love to hear more about your process.
Thank you very much for that. I'll begin that by saying that I've always written about landscape and people, and I think I always will, because it's an inexhaustible terrain. It's unfathomable in its complexities and in its darknesses as well as its lights. We're willing to die to reach the summit of a mountain. We're willing to kill for the sake of an imagined territory, which we might call a nation. So I probably will always write about this, but I've always been fascinated by the point at which matter and metaphor come together. Place gives us many of the metaphors we live by, to use Lascaux and Johnson's famous phrase. So in a sense, what I try to do with every book is to give it the material and historical specificities that to me are a kind of a roughness that is the lived aspects of it, but also without denying those, to set the whole thing ringing like a kind of bell or series of bells, because the Underland is brutally material. It's a place of exploitation, of death, of danger, as I began by saying, of incarceration, for things being put out of sight. But it's also, we've mined it for our minds as well. We've mined it for myth and metaphor and story. It's both of those things and many more besides. But in terms of practicalities, I carry notebooks. I don't know if they popped up on the slideshow already, but did the slideshow ever start going? Oh. Maybe somebody could just pop in behind me and just see if they can start it going, because that might keep you entertained for the last 19 minutes of my blether. But I keep notebooks. They'll turn up. Do you want to? It's frozen. Oh dear. Technology. Okay, I carry notebooks because they don't hang. They do not smash. They bend, and they carry damage on them as a kind of memory rather than as a pure dysfunction. So I carry notebooks, and into those I put little fragments, really just thought shards as they come, and sometimes literal bits and bobs of stuff, flakes of mica, feathers, pinches of soil, whatever those souvenirs are, and then and they carry that sort of immediacy of the moment, to me at least. And then when I get back from somewhere, I will sit for as long as I can brace when my children are not tugging at my sleeves. I love my children. I'm normally there at the school gates at 3:30. My wife's a historian of political extremism. She takes far more risks than I do, and is an awesome person. And actually, my books take so long that I'm not away very much. And then I will just pour every memory I have, every bit of data I have. And I always think of that as like the pot stage, or the clay for the pot stage. That ugly moment where you kind of scoop that big gooey handful of stuff, and then boonk, it goes down. And then you start treadling. And then the treadling is what takes the years. So I guess that maybe if I can give an answer, it's those three stages: the sharp moments that are only there, available in the instant, then the heavy kind of clay slap, and then the treadling. And the treadling is the really boring bit, but actually that's where so much of the work gets done. So I revise, for years. Thank you for the question.
All right, I'll go ahead. Thanks. Thanks so much. It's fantastic. I have a very Washington, D.C. question.
Do you want to lean into
Am I close enough?
Yeah.
I have a very Washington, D.C. question about global security policy. Directly related to
I'm not
promise.
Robert Harris.
Well, I was struck by your talking about past and present the way that you did. There's this fascinating book by a Canadian philosopher named Ian Hacking called The Taming of Chance, about how risk, the invention of it in the 17th century, overturned Aristotelian determinism, this idea that the past methodically determines the present, and changed our thinking in that the future now determines the present. And so we study and bound problems about the future. And this is the dominant way of thinking about risk for national security decision making. But it strikes me that the way you describe the Anthropocene and the notion of global catastrophes. I'm sorry.
That's good. Yeah.
Better.
Yeah.
It strikes me that the Anthropocene, this idea of unbounded global catastrophe that we're introducing upon ourselves, ruptures our relationship with the future in a really big way. So I wondered if you had any thoughts about how we make decisions being sort of orphaned in time, cut off from the past and the future.
Well, I've in a way, I feel it sounds to me as though you are the best person to answer a beautiful question, and I may turn it back to you because I come to learn as well as to tell. I'm trying to think how best to answer that, and I suppose I look to the forms of sort of street and manifesto national level politics that I'm involved in back in Britain, where one of the attempts has been to overcome the necessary short-termism, not just the short-termism of Brexit, which has basically paralyzed our polity, but the broader short-termism of ministers entering ministries and moving out again soon, the political terms, and all of these problems that effectively place a horizon marker at about 4 years. And I think something is happening, at least in British political consciousness, and it's happened in part because of Greta Thunberg, of the school strikes, which I don't know how they've been here, but they've been very consequential in Britain, and then the Extinction Rebellion occupation of London over Easter. And we've seen a gradual sort of domino effect of climate emergencies being declared from local councils up to entire countries. Wales, we've just seen a big overturning of a very controversial decision for the M4 extension in South Wales, which was due to run through the Gwent levels, which are a rare wetland. So it's too much to string these together and claim a paradigm shift of political thinking, but I do sense a medium termism beginning to creep out of a sort of visionary street politics and into policy making. But this may be delusory. So can I turn it back on you? And it sounds like this you may be a practitioner or theorist in this. But what do you think about this? Come a bit closer. Yeah.
Just yank this out of
Yeah, you're tall.
Since I'm so tall.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think we're not equipped to make decisions like this. I think
in the US?
In the US, certainly. I think most of our decisions are made on the basis of risk as we understand it. But when we face problems that we can't calculate, I think we get stymied. So I don't know that we've come up with really good solutions for climate catastrophe, for global credit collapse, for pandemics. So I worry about it, and it's my job to worry about it as well. But
okay.
I don't know that we have good answers. So I was.
Do you mean beyond quantification?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I can see why the system will not tolerate that. Yeah. Thank you. Should we go to that microphone and then that one? Yeah. Hi.
Hi. I'm curious whether there was a story or an experience or a bit of research or a person that you really liked that didn't make it into the book that you wanted to share?
That is a great question. Well, I will just say that before I began writing this book, so sometime between 2010 and when I really kicked off on it in 2012, I realized that I needed to know if I could tolerate some of the personal experiences that I would need to go through. I should say the book is sort of told, as you heard, in the present when I'm there, but then sort of opens out into historical, cultural, philosophical, deep time echoes. So I called up a friend of mine, John Beattie, who's features in The Old Ways and in The Wild Places, if you know those books. But he was a caver, and I said, "Look, John, could you take me underground and just really scare me for a day?" And he said, "Yes, I know just the place. It's called Giant's Hole, and then you abseil into a pot under the Peak District, and then you move through something called the Crab Walk. And the Crab Walk is like, if you imagine making yourself really thin and then entering a curtain, like actually in between the two sides of the curtain. So you were that thin, and then you follow a folded curtain like that. This has been carved by a water-worn stream. It's been worn by water down into the earth, carbonic acid eroding limestone over many hundreds of thousands of years. And we did this, and it was utterly thrilling to me. I was so exhilarated by being down there and being in this very dynamic space, beautiful, graceful, sculptural space made by water action and gravity and physics and chemistry over such a period of time, but with all the intent of a Baroque form. And then we reached this thing called the Vice. And John had told me that the Vice was coming up. And the Vice was not an expansive place. The Vice was, it was pretty tight. John had drunk quite a lot of Barnsley Bitter in the years between passing through the Vice and then coming down again with me. And John, I slid through because I can turn myself sideways and stuff, and I'm not vast around the hips. And John got a little bit stuck in the Vice, and obviously I was faced with the choice between going on and abandoning him, or helping push him kind of back out of the Vice and then going back up with him. So I took the middle ground. I pushed him back out of the Vice, and then I abandoned him, and went on into the earth. And at one point, the stream itself bored a shaft and disappeared in deep down, and I carried on. And I found myself in this chamber that cavers call the dormitory, utterly silent because the sound of this river stream had gone dry. And I felt more peaceful there than I had felt in so long on the surface. And I sat there, I turned the light off, sat there in the dark for a while. And I came back out to the light, utterly exhilarated by what I'd found down there, and knowing that this was a place of revelation as well as of confinement. So I didn't write about that because in a way it was like the test, but it has remained in my mind as a very powerful experience. So thank you for the question.
Thank you.
I'm here to say thank you. I'm a digital friend. I participated in the book club last summer.
Which one? The
Seaball,
Rings
the
of
Rings
Saturn.
of Saturn.
Hey.
It was magnificent. I mean, it was an intellectual experience that I had not even anticipated.
Oh.
So thank you so much. I love the word of the day.
It's on vacation at the moment.
I know.
Yeah.
That's how I knew you were going to be here, was looking for the word of the day. And I just thank you for all of your work.
Well, that is the loveliest thing. Thank you so much.
And I hope you do another book club sometime soon. I'm sure it took a lot of time, and I'm hoping that you will mention a little bit from your side if it met your expectations. And then the one question I want to ask is, when I saw the picture of the queue up Mount Everest.
Oh, yes.
I believe that for me, I mean, I have chill bumps even just saying it. I believe that for all of us should stop us in our tracks. And I'm hoping that just like a panda bear people fall in love with, I'm hoping that vision and the later reports of all of the trash and the dead bodies that have been reclaimed, I'm hoping that wakes us up somehow. What do you think? Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Wow, British readings are not like this. I am not going home. Britain can keep Trump. You got me. Thank you so much. Yes, I will. So I'm very active normally on Twitter, and I normally post a word of the day to Landscape or the Anthropocene or Nature or Place at 7 a.m. every morning. And I've run two Twitter reading groups. One on The Dark is Rising by Susan Cooper that was thousands of people. Were you involved in that? Yes, I was. Hey, well, we had a great time. And one of your... Okay, I saw you nodding when I mentioned Susan Cooper's name. So, and then we did a smaller one on W.G. Zebalt's The Rings of Saturn. And that was... But the quality of the engagement, in both of them, actually, but in this much was incredible. We had political philosophers from Australia joining in. We had readers who'd never met Zebalt, who just didn't know what this what was happening in the book, and then found their way into it. And it's been, I love Twitter for its ability to communicate and reach and teach and converse and share and bring people together. So what was the second part of your very kind question? Mount Everest. Oh my goodness. Okay, yes. So I wrote a film called Mountain in 2017. Some of you may have seen it. It was narrated by Willem Dafoe. It was sort of an adaptation of the first book I ever wrote. And I wrote a line in that film which accompanied shots of Everest from 2015. And I wrote, this isn't climbing, it's queuing. And I also wrote some other things about the Everest culture, which were edited out of that film. They said it was, my director and I talked a lot about it, but in the end she felt it was too tough on Everest. I don't think it was. And that line came back to me, of course, when I saw this awful, tragic, tawdry procession. It wasn't a procession, nobody could proceed, at 8,800 meters plus on Everest. And I think it did centralize and concentrate many of the things that are profoundly wrong in our relationship with place. I would say that the Everest permit system represents an income of multiple $1 million for one of the poorest countries in the world for climbers coming from the Nepal side. So I absolutely understand why Nepal is issuing and arguably over-issuing climbing permits. But that was, in effect, as I see it, a cue for the ultimate selfie. And people used to ask me, would you like to climb Everest? My first response was, I'm not a good enough climber, that's absolutely right. And the second was, I'd rather sump dive a drain than climb Everest. There are so many beautiful mountains in the world, and some of them are under 3,000 feet high. And I think this obsession with the absolute, the ultimate, the total is this conquistadorial vision of our relationship with place was embodied there. And yes, I don't think much will change. I think the companies will have to shift the way they bring their clients there, and they will have to introduce some kind of grading and assessment system. Yes, and then, yeah, we got 5 more minutes.
Okay, well, I feel a little redundant because I also came up here to say thank you so much for your word of the day.
Not redundant. Keep it coming.
I think my favorite one was an Old English word, which I can't pronounce, but which I keep a screenshot of, which was described as the worries that gather in the mind as you lie sleepless before the dawn.
Oh, yes.
And I thought to myself, what? There's a word for that except every night. So every morning at 3 a.m. after I experience that. And then I wake up and I get on Twitter and there's all the anger and frustration and bad news coming overnight from Europe. I know I'm going to hit the word of the day and I'm going to get that moment of peace in the morning before I have to get up. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I will try to keep it going. These two wonderful Sikh twins, 12-year-old boys from London came up to me and they said something similar, and they were like, we learn so much, it opens up each day for us. And I was just about to give up because it takes a lot of time. It's like 20 minutes, half an hour a day. And then hearing you, it's lovely to know that these things live in people's lives and help you sometimes with the cares of the world that gather just before dawn when you lie sleepless. So, yeah, thank you. Yeah, I can't remember. Oh, couldn't you tell?
I have it, but I can't pronounce it.
Okay, do we have any Old English specialists in the room? I'm going to pronounce it perfectly. Oh, yeah, actually, I can. So it's Utkaru. I wouldn't get away with that in Cambridge, I tell you. You can't move for Anglo-Saxonists around there. Yeah. So yeah, the and I compare it to the Swedish Vagtimmen, which is wolf time, which are the menacing transitional hours when night shades into dawn, when the wolves gather. Actually, I really like wolves, but you know what I mean. Okay. I think have we got time for? Yeah, great. Okay, no.
I'll try and be brief. So I can't help but think of you as sort of a postmodern Dante, since you are a poet and you've written about mountains and now you've written about the underworld. Was there a sort of Virgil for you in this journey that was sort of a literary voice from the past that you felt accompanied you in writing this book?
Well, that's such a good question. And if I ever do get name cards made up, I'm gonna have postmodern Dante on there. And also Dingbat, which is what my 6-year-old calls me. Whenever I get excited about Underland, which I occasionally do because it's taken so long and suddenly it's meeting people, I remember that for a long time my autocorrect changed Underland to Underpants whenever I typed it. So that kept my feet on the ground. But I thought I was accompanied by, as you say, there's this long tradition of underworld journeys being made in the company of guides. And I benefited from many of those amazing men and women here who took me into places I could never have got to. And is there a voice from the past? That is such a good question. And the answer is that there is. There's a remarkable early modern 17th century writer called Sir Thomas Browne. How good to see recognition on... Sorry? Yeah, Religio, exactly. Religio Medici, urn burial, and Pseudodoxia epidemica. He lived not far from where I live now. He lived in Norwich. You can find a great Stephen Greenblatt New York Review of Books edition of Urn Burial. And he was a polymath, and he came at all questions slant. I mean, that's kind of what early modern philosophers did anyway, because they were interdisciplinary, because disciplines didn't really exist. But he wrote this slender book called Urn Burial, which is really a deep time vision of shallow land, and it's just about the uncovering of urns below the surface, just 6 inches down in a field in Norfolk, East Anglian, England, not far from where I live. And these prompt this extraordinary meditation on burial, interment, and time from Browne. And it's a glorious elegy and a eulogy. And at one point he talks about the urns as conservatories. And when we say conservatories now, at least in England, this means a kind of glass and steel structure you stick on the end of your house, right? But he meant conservatories in the sense that they conserve. And that lovely moving back into the roots and the underland of a word, springing it into strangeness again, is very exciting to me. So Browne and Urn Burial was one of the first books I sat down with, and to read myself down and back from a 17th century perspective. So yeah, thank you very much.